Welcome to The Classical Mind, a podcast about the great books in the Western canon. We're your hosts. I'm Father Wesley Walker.
And I'm Dr. Junius Johnson.
And Junius, it's been a while since we've been able to record with scheduling and everything. The start of the semester came up fast, and I think we've both been pretty busy. How is your school year going so far?
Yeah, that's right. It has been pretty busy, but it's been good. Lots of good travels and getting to do some good conversations with some folks in Colorado and in Nashville and things like that. So, um, keeping busy.
That's
How about you?
awesome. Yeah, same. Lots of going on with school, and that's been a lot of fun to be in classes again. I think there's something kind of energizing and life-giving about being a student in a classroom, but also some traveling as well. A couple trips. Took a trip down to Atlanta, Georgia for a church thing, and then another trip down to one of our churches in Charlottesville, Virginia to give a talk. So it's been just really crazy, but thankfully things are starting to settle into a more regular rhythm. So yeah,
No.
it's been a wild couple months. So, but it's good to come and talk about a book that I don't know when the first time you read this, but I think I first read this in ninth grade, The Taming of the Shrew by
Yeah.
Shakespeare. Um, yeah, when did you first experience the
I think it
text?
was high school as well. It's one of those books that kind of feels like I've known for as long as I've known Shakespeare. And I know my first Shakespeare was Caesar, so and that would have been Caesar was in probably ninth grade, I think. So I think maybe I read it in 10th or 11th grade or something.
Okay, yeah.
Mhm.
I remember reading it for a Shakespeare class.
Hmm.
Actually, no, I don't even think it was a Shakespeare class. I think the class was primarily Taming of the Shrew for a semester we spent taming on the book. And at ninth grade, there's a lot that definitely went over my head.
You don't say.
Especially a lot of the innuendo, which I was just, so when I picked it back up, I was like not quite prepared for that. It's funny, I was just talking to someone about the new Taylor Swift album.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of innuendo on the album, and they were so kind of shocked about this whole thing. And I mean, it is somewhat shocking, I guess, given her career arc. But I was like, man, I've been reading Taming of the Shrew, and I feel like it's way worse.
Yeah, it's one of these things that's the comedies especially they're crowd pleasers. The person who comes to see a Hamlet or a Macbeth, knowing they're going to go see a tragedy, yeah, Shakespeare loves to. He's a master of putting the funny scenes in there, even in the most serious works, and pacing all that stuff really well. But when it comes to the comedies, man, I mean, people want to have a rip-roaring good time, and I feel like he's playing to the cheap seats for some of the stuff. And I don't mean that in a bad way, as if
Oh,
it's less good art or something like that. But you got to be on your toes with the references. You need the notes about the language a lot more, perhaps, than you do in the tragedies. And you really, even more than a tragedy, a comedy really benefits from being watched, from seeing it performed by someone who understands what's going on and can put that to the ground. I was thinking about this right before we came on, that some of the language of this, that opens up, I'll feed you in faith. A pair of socks, you rogue. Yar baggage, the slies are no rogues, and so on. And it's like that can just feel so stilted and formal in the reading of it. But on stage, it's not necessarily the case that Shakespeare would have expected his actors to say precisely these lines. He's just sort of giving them a sense of the scene that they're going to act from. But for us on this side of Shakespeare having become the most important author in English literature, we don't dare change a word.
yeah.
And so it's a real challenge to figure out how to play these lines so that the audience feels what they mean and they feel natural and not like an artificial form of language, right? It's very, very challenging to do.
Yeah, I was thinking about this during one of the scenes with all the servants, and they're
Hmm.
they're kind of speaking in very quick succession to each other.
Hmm.
And it's like, what? And you can see it like almost if you're playing it as a movie in your head, like you could see where that would be really funny. But if you're just reading it, it's harder to get it completely. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it's a very interesting play for that reason. Now, one question I kind of wanted to ask at the very beginning is, what do you think it's about?
I I think okay, so you're gonna get right to one of the big things that I wanted to talk about, um, which is that I think that he is writing this in conversation with the wife of Bot's tale.
Mm.
I think that's his conversation partner in the back of his head. And so if you will recall, the wife of Bath tells this story about an Arthurian knight who has raped a woman and has been caught, and he's going to be sentenced to death. But then Guinevere intercedes for him and begs that he be handed over to her for judgment. And so her judgment is you've got to go out and you've got to figure out what it is that women want. And if you can come back here and tell us what women want by the appointed day, then we'll pardon you and let you live. And so he has, adventures and blah, blah, blah. And bottom line, what he discovers is that what women want is that they want to be in charge in the relationship. They want to be the masters in the relationship. And it's really wonderful. Chaucer's doing great things playing with the courtly love tradition and how that tends to put the women in charge. Often the women are of higher noble status in that tradition and whatnot. And he also does it in such a way that we get to see, through the character of the wife of Bath, that how she, who has had five husbands and is written to call to mind the woman at the well, how she has really looks at marriage in terms of this transactional. What can I get out of it, and
Hmm.
how can I, stake my own claim within it? And so it makes a lot of sense that you have both this sort of high courtly drama as well as a very practical commoner's take on things coinciding in the moral that, if you want to be happy in your marriage, give your wife whatever she wants, let her do things her way and all that kind of a thing. So I see Shakespeare as responding to that in a way that is so if I'm right that he's got Chaucer in mind, and specifically the wife of Bath, then I wouldn't take this play as making a sort of major moral or societal point. I would take it as being a sort of comic response to a tale that he probably would have taken to be more or less comical itself. And so it's more of an in literary joke than it is some sort of a comment on the War of the Sexes.
Interesting, interesting. Yeah, because a lot of the literature about Taming of the Shrew, at least from what I can tell, seems to come down on one side or the other really strongly. Like either this is a kind of sexist farce,
Hmm.
or it is this kind of really profound meditation on power and identity and love, which feels like a very obviously modern, interpretation, which isn't necessarily wrong. I mean, there are certainly dynamics in the play that would speak to maybe larger things, but I'm not sure. I think you're right that from Shakespeare's perspective, this is more of a comedy kind of joke rather than it is, any kind of profound statement about these things.
Yeah, yeah, especially since it's fairly early. Written
Yes,
between
that's right.
1590 and 1594. And so we have a Shakespeare who is still testing out his powers, and playing with the form and all of that. And I think that comes across in a couple of different ways in the play. And yeah, another thing that's a major, I mean, look, elephant in the room, if you talk about the Taming of the Shrew, is feminism.
Hmm.
Because it has been the target of a lot of feminist scholarship that wants to say that it is, despicable and horrible, and it's an emblem of everything that's wrong um, with the time and how men think, and this is what happens when you put men in charge of things and all this other sort of a thing. Um, and interestingly, I read mine in the Riverside Shakespeare, and so there are these, scholarly introductions to each play. And the introduction was so deeply concerned to defend the play against those types of feminist critiques that I was really surprised. Would have expected a bit of more of a balanced presentation of, well, some people think this about the play, and there's another point of view, and we can look at it this way. But he was really pushing kind of hard
Hmm.
to say, like, no, like I need to shut that whole way of reading things down. And I actually think that if Shakespeare were presented with that debate, um, I think he would probably laugh, and he would say, when he finished having his good laugh at how seriously we were taking this thing, he's like, guys, it's a comedy. Come on. I think he would say, yeah, like, of course the feminists are right. Like the portrayal of the relations between the sexes it is ridiculous. At the same time, it's also very serious in that sense because a lot of people do think and act this way. And so it's verisimilitudinous, right? It's mimetic, even at the same time that it's cognizant of the absurdities of some of the relations it portrays.
Yeah.
And I think one of the most important, for me, with all of this, one of the most important keys to interpreting this thing is how it begins. is the fact that it's a play within a play.
It's the only Shakespeare play with a framing narrative, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's right. And it presages the play within a play that we'll get in Hamlet, but it's inverted
right.
because now instead of the play that we're watching those guys watch a play, we're actually the play that we came to see is a play that somebody else is watching. And
Yes.
so we're caught up in the frame in a different sort of way. So I do want to talk about that and how that fits together. Um, I think it's important to keep in mind that I'm not a big fan of like early late stuff because a lot of times when people talk about something being early in an author's career versus late, they're trying to find this development and see
Hmm.
how maybe he changed his mind about things and find tensions in the author. And I I think that more often than not with the authors whom we happen to have as major figures of the Western conversation, there's a deep continuity through all of their thinking rather than some sharp turn or something like that.
Hmm.
But in this instance, I think it is really helpful to keep in mind that it's early Shakespeare because we'll see little well, there are some lines that he'll come back to in later plays that when he's sort of found a better home for them and can use them to greater effect. And there are some tropes that he's playing with and things of that nature. There's a very experimental in the sense of he's just playing with a lot of ideas in this one. And so I think it's really important. It's kind of a seminal text because if you know it really well, you'll see it showing up in other texts throughout the Shakespeare corpus.
Mm, yeah. The introduction's very interesting, right? So you've got this guy who's a drunk who
Mm.
gets found by a nobleman who decides to play a trick on him, which is that he tells all of his servants to treat this guy like he's a nobleman and that he's
Hmm.
been crazy the whole time.
Yeah.
Um, and so they kind of keep telling him this until he believes it, or that's the
Hmm.
idea of it, anyways. Which in some ways is a little bit of foreshadowing, I think, right?
Mm.
Because the
Yeah.
end of the book, the way Catherine is tamed at the end, it's because Petruchio has kind of told her this whole time who she is, even though it's been totally contrary to the reality. And so finally she kind of ends up believing it or embodying it. And so the same can kind of be said about the tinker at the beginning of the play. He's
Mm.
being told you're actually a nobleman, and then he finally you kind of see him start to maybe believe it, which then I mean there is a sense in which this is kind of meta. Um, I think now when we see this kind of stuff in movies and things, we kind of roll our eyes because it's like tired, but
Mm.
it's at the time, I think probably would have been pretty interesting and very unique that there's this kind of larger maybe commentary or maybe not commentary, but maybe kind of playfulness about
Yeah.
this. It's very self-aware, right?
Yeah.
We're watching a performance about the performance of marriage or gender or whatever kind of, whatever's kind of wrapped up in that.
That's right. Yeah, and I think that's right. And so correspondence is a word that I would turn
Mm.
to for that. The correspondence between the two levels of the play, the Tinkerer level and then the play that he's watching being performed in front of him. That's really meaningful wherever you find correspondences. Those are resonances that are heightened by the fact that it's a callback to what was set up at the beginning. It makes this introduction. How is it even called in the text? Because it's pre-Act One, right?
Yeah, is it
They
the
call it a
induction?
prologue. Yeah, I'm trying to, my page won't
Induction.
turn. Induction, yeah. Yeah, the induction, which itself has two scenes before we even get to Act One. It makes the induction a kind of prologue in the sense that we saw in Midsummer Nights, where the old theatrical practice of the job of a prologue is to come forward and tell you everything you're about to see in the play before you see it. And this is one of those experimental things of let me give you the prologue in the form of itself a play, which then has you subtly have to think about, okay, so how did what I just saw in the induction prefigure? How does that serve as a sort of synopsis for what I'm seeing in the main body of the play? And of course, watching the play, no one comes out and says, okay, this isn't Act One, Scene One. This is actually an induction. I'll let you know when we get to Act One, Scene One. If you're just watching the play, this just feels like the induction Scene One is Act One, Scene One.
Yeah.
And by the time we get to what is really Act One, Scene One, you're thinking it's either Act One, Scene Three or beginning of Act Two or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so that's all of the form of it is hard to pin down. And I wonder if when he first showed this to people, to the actors, if they were like, okay, this kid might be too clever for his own good, or
Yeah.
like, who's gonna get this?
Yeah, that is interesting. One part about this, because we use that word correspondence, and it is true, there is that kind of foreshadowing. There's clearly a relationship. You can read the play as having a very clear end.
Hmm.
There is not a clear end to the Christopher Sly
Yeah.
thing, which
Yeah.
makes me wonder if the ending of the play is not as clear as we might think it is.
Interesting. In the sense that, so if, am I understanding you correctly to say, since the frame play never gets an ending, we should be suspicious of what seems like an ending in the play. Maybe it's also less ending than we think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I
it's
think
quite
that's kind
interesting.
of, I think that's, I could, because, I mean, I think this raises a question which we'll have to talk about, I think, over the episode, so I don't expect that we'll have an answer right now. But is Catherine's character development a sort of genuine change, or is she merely learning to perform certain behaviors just to appease her husband because he's just so over the top with her? And so his taming of her is not a real like inside out, she becomes a different person, but she's learning to put on a persona. Um, in which case, the ending is not a neatly wrapped up kind of thing.
Hmm.
It's just
Hmm.
sort of like she's figured out how to shift, change with the times, kind of thing. But
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I don't know. But that's certainly something that I thought about as I was thinking, because after I finished the play, let me say, it took me a while to read this, not because it was
Mm.
very long, but just because of time crunch and stuff. So I had read the induction and Act One or Act Two a while ago, and then I was only just this past week really picking it back up for the closing acts. And so at the end, it was kind of like, wait a second, what did the induction have to do with this? And so,
Yes.
yeah, I was wondering if that maybe there's something in that lack of resolution to the induction.
There's a third option there to the two that you gave, and that is that who Kate becomes at the end is who she always kind of was underneath,
Mm,
but she's freed up to be it now in a way that she wasn't free to be before.
okay.
So we'll have to consider all three of those options as we go through this. No, I actually, when I got to the end, it had been long enough since I read this that when I got to the end, I was like, wait, am I missing something? Like, where's the rest of the induction? And I had to go and look up and do research. Like, no, my text is integral. There aren't pages torn out. There really isn't.
Yeah.
He never returns to it and goes back to that. And so that's really, really fascinating to me.
I
Um,
like your interpretation of that, but it feels sort of well, it's very Christian,
mm.
which is not a bad thing, obviously. But but it just feels like the idea then becomes marriage as a kind of sanctifying thing, which of course
Hmm.
I believe is true. I just don't know if that's what Shakespeare's getting at, but we can talk
Yeah,
about it more.
yeah, I don't either. But it's also it would, if that should turn out to be true, that if this third possibility should turn out to be true, then it would also mean that rather than her being dominated in her marriage and sort of made a kind of, slave to her husband's will, the marriage actually produces the space of freedom that she didn't have in her life before and that she feared from marriage to begin with. She thought marriage would be a permanent unfreedom and it would paradoxically turn out to be a place of freedom for her, which would be
Hmm.
salutary if that's the case. But we mustn't say this what the play means just because it would be cool.
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
There's
Unfortunately,
a
it doesn't work that way.
two things I want to point out about the induction. One is line 69 of the induction, or also in 68 when Sly is speaking. He says, "Am I a lord, and have I such a lady? Or do I dream? Or have I dreamed till now?" And I think that "do I dream or have I dreamed till now" that presages a bit of Romeo and Juliet and maybe a bit of Midsummer Night's Dream as well. It's a nice line there. The other thing is, I love the way that they continually speak to him as if he is what he's not, trying to call him out of his, and they have to kind of ignore all of his low classisms, right? Because he says all of these things, it
Yeah.
just gets so many things wrong. And so while that's going on, even when he's trying to, he's accepted it and he's trying to act the role, he can't help but get it wrong because he doesn't actually know. Underneath, he isn't really a lord. And this is relevant to what you were saying earlier about the self-awareness and the meta character of it. Of course, it's quite famously known that for the most part, the female roles in Shakespeare were played by young boys, and so every time you've got a female character in Shakespeare, you've got a cross-dressing situation going on, and I don't think that there's any. I would resist any attempt to recast that in a sort of homoerotic light. But I think it's actually just funny to the Renaissance mind. And so this notion that everyone watching the play knows that they're seeing a boy pretending to be a girl. And so as you're playing these things out and you're watching that happening, that's in the back of everyone's mind. And Shakespeare famously loves to play with that. Nowhere better than in Twelfth Night, where he's got a girl who has to pretend to be a boy because of the situations he's in. So you got a boy dressed up like a girl, dressed up like a boy,
Right.
um, who's then wooing a girl who's really a boy dressed up as a girl, and the boy dressed up as a girl dressed up as a boy, wooing the boy dressed up as a girl, finds that suddenly the boy dressed up as a girl falls in love with the boy dressed up as a girl as a boy, and it's hilarious, and
Yeah.
it's funny because you see all those different layers of it that are going on. There's an added layer of comedy when you recognize that yes, that actor is also a boy. So we have a similar situation here in the
Yeah.
induction, right? Where they take a boy, a page, and they tell him to dress up and pretend to be the man's wife. And this funny thing is, they introduce the wife to him. He's fought against, I don't, am I this? Can I do that? He's been slow to accept things, but all of a sudden, here's this woman that is he's allowed to have, and he slides into that real quick. And there's this funny bit where he says, um, "'Tis much. Servants, leave me and her alone. Madam, undress you and come now to bed." And of course, we know that's the one thing the page can't do because it's going to spoil the whole thing if he does that. And so he's ready to hand with a excuse why they can't do that yet. And then luckily the play comes in to give them something else to do to kind of distract them from that. But that's just, I thought that was so hilarious.
Yes. That whole thing was funny. And then even the very last thing he says, come, madam, wife, sit by my side and let the world slip. We shall ne'er be younger. I just thought that whole thing was great.
Yeah.
So you have a boy dressed up as a boy pretending to be a girl there. Yeah.
Yeah. And another thing, I was at a conference a couple of years ago, and there was a Shakespeare guy there. He was a Shakespeare. He directed plays, and he drew our attention to. He says, always pay attention to what's on stage.
Hmm.
And so they're doing the last scene from Romeo and Juliet. He's like, "What's on the stage?" And you're like, "Well, there's the Juliet's tomb. What else is on the stage?" He's like, "There's additional bodies on the stage that you don't really think about when you're reading it."
Hmm.
Likewise, here at the end of induction, they all sit and then flourish and then enter Lucentio and his Mantronio, which means Sly and all those other people are sitting on stage for the whole rest of the play
Yeah.
watching this. So you're never allowed to forget, if you stage it right, you're never allowed to forget that this is a play within a play because there's never an exeunt for those characters.
That's right. Which
I've never
which
seen a performance do it that way. They always, any performance, they always cut away from that, and then those characters are off screen and you move on.
it feels like one of the things you could do. I know there are some plays where if you go see them at different days, they do things slightly differently.
Hmm.
You certainly, if you were doing it the way that it's written and you had Sly on stage the whole time, you could certainly almost play with that a little bit. Like maybe one night he actually starts to realize what's going on based on what's going on in the play or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That would be interesting. And then maybe some nights he's just super clueless and gets drunk again and passes out.
Yeah, yeah, and you could have him, fall asleep or snore at a point when the action's getting kind of tense and break the tension that way. I mean, there's a lot you
Yeah.
could do with that, and that's all. This acting is very improvisational, and we have to
Yes.
remember whenever we read a Shakespeare play, we're reading the notes that were meant to provide a context for the performance, but the performance was not going to be done word for word in the way that is written down here, in the way that we do now.
Yeah.
Just same thing with music, right? Music from the Renaissance and Baroque music, they didn't perform note for note what was on the page. That
Right.
that was a starting place, but embellishment and improvisation were expected and normal. And so that's having these guys on stage is a whole other realm of improvisation that would have been a part of original performance.
What we're trying to say is that listeners, if you own a theater company and you want Junius and I to come direct a Taming of the Shrew, we would love to do that with you. So
I was born to play Sly.
That's right. That's right. Uh, well, so maybe I thought, unless you have any objections, we could talk a little bit about the two sisters at the heart of the play,
Yeah.
because I think that's a really important sort of contrast. Um, so obviously, the play revolves around the suitors of these two women, sisters,
Hmm.
and Kat is the older. She's sort of in many ways the public rebel. She is angry. She is sharp-witted, brutally honest, we might say. Um, and really the larger culture sees this as problematic. They see her kind of way of truth telling as bad, disorderly, because she really bucks the social system, right? She doesn't just submit and sit there quietly and, look pretty for everyone in hopes that a man will come and, save her from her singleness. I mean, she is kind of really in some ways a kind of modern woman in a way. Um, whereas Bianca is the younger sister is much more at least outwardly submissive.
Hmm.
But it seems as though there are a number of places where her outward submissiveness allows her to have more control because she knows how to kind of work the system.
Yeah.
And so she has an outward obedience that's deemed acceptable by the larger culture, but she uses that in order to exert her will in
Yeah.
ways that are a little bit, uh, at least in their world, would have been, maybe a little unfitting or whatever.
Yeah. She's at the end of the play, she gets what the wife of Bob says every woman wants, which is control over her husband in the sense that he can't control her in the slightest.
Right.
Right. And I think that the key to their relationship is to be found in Act 2, Scene 1.
Yes.
When they're having that they're talking and Bianca is like, hey, get, come on, sis, like just get married, right? Let's just move this thing along, it's got to happen, let's just facilitate this thing. And Kate gets mad and hits her, and then their dad comes in and sees it, and then Kate responds, what, will you not suffer me? Nay, now I see. She is your treasure. She must have a husband. I must dance barefoot on her wedding day. And for your love to her, lead apes in hell. Talk not to me. I will go sit and weep till I can find occasion of revenge. That's not sharp-witted, wicked Kate.
No.
That's someone who is deeply bitter because she feels that her father loves her sister better, that she's not the favorite,
Yep.
and that she's like, I'm in the way and I'm just the inconvenience. And this is the basis of the reading, that she is maybe what she is at the end of the play is who she always would have been, with who she
Mm.
wanted to be. But the situation at home, as she saw it, this is not to say that she's what she's saying is fair to Baptista or to Bianca at all, although the end of the play makes it seem like it might be fair to Bianca. But as she sees it, she's been wronged and she's been unappreciated, and so she's acting out in response to something, right? And she only ceases to do that when she's in a situation where she no longer has to do that.
Hmm. Yes, I could see that. It seems as though the father is very concerned about social norms,
Mm-hmm.
whereas Petruchio is not.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that Kat is wired is such that she is her own person. She is very unique and is not someone who fits in easily in the larger culture, whereas Bianca can navigate those waters smoothly. And so yeah, I think she in some ways I think you could read this as she in getting married, she marries the right person who allows her to kind of have the space to be herself. Whereas, yeah, the dad is always kind of worried about this. And so,
Mm-hmm.
whether Bianca's the actual favorite or not, she certainly behaves in a way that the father prefers.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, she's playing the role right correctly at the beginning,
yeah.
and we know from the ending of the play that she's playing a role. That's not really who she is. She's not the demure, sweet girl that she pretends to be. She's
Mhm.
very strong-willed and individualistic and this sort of a thing. Not apt to be ruled by any man. She doesn't. She welcomes marriage because it's freedom from her father's house and it's the beginning of the next stage of her life. But I feel like she welcomes marriage in part because it's where she will finally have scope for herself.
Yeah.
She knows she's going to be able to take charge of her man and run her house.
She has the same mentality as the mom from My Big Fat Greek Wedding when she says the man is the head of the house, but the woman is the neck, and she can
That's
turn the
right.
head whichever way she wants.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Um, Whereas I think what Kate is after is something entirely different. I think Kate wants it to be okay for her to be what she is.
Yeah.
And I think that's never been the case because of her father's concerns about societal expectations. And so she's oppressed by his sense of what a daughter ought to be. And Bianca's happy just playing the role because she figures out I've just got to do this for a set amount of time and then I'll be free. And Kate's like, I won't pretend, like I won't do it. You can't make me do it. So there's a kind of integrity about Kate for that.
Hmm.
And then you're right. That makes Petruchio the perfect person for her then because he's not going to force her to constantly care what people think. And he shows that right away when it's like, yeah, we're not going to stick around for the reception. We're out. We got to go.
Yeah. It's question actually about the beginning, right? So the whole reason that this marriage happens is because well, number one, Petruchio has come to marry wise wealthily.
Hmm.
But he's pointed to Kat by other men who are suitors, wannabe suitors of Bianca. They want to
Right.
marry her. The father has made a rule that Bianca can only get married if Kat gets married.
Yep.
It does not seem that that rule is grounded in any hard and fast social norm, though, because when he exerts that, everyone is mad at him for it.
Hmm.
It's not, it
Hmm.
doesn't seem like a normal thing to do, which
Hmm.
raises the question, why does he require that then?
It's always seemed to me, I agree. It's not as if this is just the assumption and everyone's doing this and therefore no big deal because there wouldn't have been that backlash if that had
Yeah.
been the case. I think you're reading that right. It's always seemed to me that he has this rule because he's aware that it's going to have a hard time getting a husband for Kate.
Hmm.
And so he's like, if I do this, I kind of make exactly what happens, right? I make all those would-be suitors for Bianca allies in getting Kate settled properly,
Hmm.
and then we can move on. So, and that's um there's this is not poor Baptista. Um, he may be a big part of the problem in how he treats his daughters. We don't have enough information to say. But even if he is, getting Kate married is looking out for Kate. It's
Hmm.
not something for him. Um, Maybe no doubt it'll be a relief for him to have her out of the house because she's made herself a pariah in the house. But nevertheless, he doesn't get paid; he pays when she gets married, and he's not looking for advantage out of the wedding and all. He just wants to know his daughter's going to be taken care of
Hmm.
because it's the possibilities for a single woman in this time are not great.
Right.
Um,
Well, she's dancing barefoot at the wedding, and
right, right. So I think that there's on the one hand, I find Baptista a very complicated character under this reading because wonderfully complex, because he is well-meaning, but he's also blind to the way that he is creating the problem too,
hmm.
because he doesn't really listen to Kate or pay attention to her, and he always takes Bianca's side or whatnot. Now again, this is a Kate's right, and she may be wrong. She may be overreading everything.
Yeah.
Um, and in which case that helps Baptista quite a lot, but it doesn't change anything for her. Whether this is really the way things are or it's just the way she thinks things are, that's what's determining how she's responding.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I was trying to envision what the dynamic of the house would look like
Mm.
if Bianca got married and Kate wasn't.
Hmm. I don't
There's
think
a
that would
part
have
of
been good,
Baptista that
right?
I read as a little bit cowardly.
Yeah.
And then again, I think you can play him different ways. That's part of the genius of this. But if that was the case, I there's also a part of me that wonders if he just knows she would basically all that abuse that she pours on Bianca would then be directed at him. And so he's like, I don't want it. I don't want it.
Yeah, and I think he would find that, but maybe not for the reason that he thinks, right?
Right.
Because I think that I imagine that Kate would feel that he would then be looking at her as this burden and this failure and this thing that he's stuck with while his darling daughter's gone off and gotten married. And so that would only increase her sense of wound, which would make her even more bitter and caustic, which would make him more exasperated, right? It's a vicious circle. It's a stupid way to respond, frankly. I mean, Kate needs a therapist.
Yes.
But you can, it's not about whether she's right or wrong to respond that way. It's just that you could see how you could be driven to this if you felt like, and listen, I mean, I'm the younger sibling and even I know about it, and all the older siblings out there know for sure, especially if you're the oldest of two, that younger sibling gets away with everything, right? Stuff that you never would have been allowed to do, they get to do because your parents have loosened up a bit. They've
Yep.
they've realized that it's actually, easier to keep kids alive than you would think, and so they don't have to be quite so strict about stuff. But older siblings have resented that since the dawn of time, right? There maybe even have been some of that at play in the Cain and Abel thing. Um, and so that's, I think the sister relationship, you're right to take us there right at the beginning because it's central to the whole thing. This isn't only a story about husbands and wives, it's also a story about sisters.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if we could talk about Petruchio for a minute, because again, in doing some extra reading about this play, it seems as though there are multiple ways of interpreting him. Petruchio, of course, is the man who comes and woos Kate.
Mhm.
And his method is over the top.
Hmm.
He withholds food, he withholds rest, he withholds clothing from her. But it's always because nothing is good enough for her.
Hmm.
So he's like literally killing her with kindness. Um, and he uses the imagery of a falcon. He's taming a falcon
Hmm.
throughout the play to kind of describe what he's doing. Now, as best as I can tell, you can kind of separate critics of this play in three camps. There are people who think that what he's doing is super literal, in which case the play is read as a kind of patriarchal uh, thing. So this is
Hmm.
where the feminist critique would come in, right? He is
Hmm.
literally taming this woman, breaking her down and forcing her into submission.
Hmm.
Which perhaps, but I find that to be the most boring of the
Yeah.
options. The other is that this is a kind of comedy between Petruchio and Kate, and that it's really a sort of battle of equals. They are kind of playing with each other in a witty way. It's banter. And then the final kind of, and I think this is the more maybe postmodern reading of it, is that this is all very ironic.
Hmm.
That Kate is she learns to play her part in a way that gains her control over
Hmm.
Petruchio. So
Hmm.
he's going all over the top. She then, in reaction, outwardly at least submits, but she does that because she realizes if she does, she retains power.
Hmm.
And of course, then you have this whole moment in Act Four, Scene Five, where he's trying to get her to say that the sun is the moon or the sun and the moon. There's all this kind of back and forth going on. It's very interesting. So I don't know what your thoughts are and kind of how you would categorize the relationship, but I found those three very distinct readings very
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, they are very interesting. That's right. And thanks for laying those out. I find that I don't read it in any of those three ways, really. I'm gonna just say something about how I this is how I've been reading it this time around. I don't know if I've always read it this way, but this is how I'm reading it this time around. It's very, very striking to me because I'm trying to read it from the Middle Ages forward rather than from the modern ages backward.
Mm,
And so it's very striking to me that the manner by which Petruchio goes about taming her shrewishness is by being shrewish. He essentially says, I'm going to one up your ridiculousness. Right? So if you think you're gonna be a tyrant and you're gonna, terrorize people and stuff, I'm gonna do it even worse than you do. There's a sense in which he takes her own behavior and he turns himself into a funhouse mirror,
hmm
reflecting her behavior back to her, but in a strongly distorted way, exaggerate it so she can't miss it, right? Um, and we see her trying to alleviate the damage that he's doing by acting like her, trying to soothe people and smooth things over and things like this. And um, that reminds me of nothing so much as Dante. A little preview of where we're going to go with Dante here, the contrapasso,
Hmm.
which is this principle, and we'll talk about this in great detail, I'm sure, when we come to Dante, but the principle of it's a combination of measure for measure. I'll say it that way since Shakespeare has a play of that title, and of the reward fitting the behavior or the punishment fitting the crime, however you're going to put it. And the Latin Requiem Mass, nil in ultum remanebit, nothing will remain and then ultus means both rewarded and punished at the
Yep.
same time. And so whatever you've done, you'll get the just desert of that. Or like in Game of Thrones, a Lannister always pays his debts, which is meant to be both a promise of good if you've done good to a Lannister and a threat of bad if you've done bad to a Lannister.
Hmm.
In Dante, we see the contrapasso in that the torments of the damned are there's this kind of the same thing they've done in life happening to them. They get stuck doing it over and over again. Paolo and Francesca, who their whole Francesca's whole story about what happened to them is in the passive voice. This happened to this, and it concludes, love led us to one death. She takes no responsibility at any point for anything that happens. So what's their punishment? They're being blown about by this wind and they can't control where they go. Right. Um, Suffering the very thing that they gave themselves over to. Well, here the contra doesn't mean you're suffering the opposite. It means that you're undergoing the thing that you wanted, but it's been turned into its opposite for you. Instead of being your greatest good, it's your greatest evil. But in Purgatorio with the saved, we see the contrapasso where if they were puffed up with pride, then they're being weighed down by a stone. The literal opposite, which is meant to cure the monstrosity. You know, you've got a tumor, so we're gonna deflate it, right? I see that here with the way Petruchio is relating to Kate, that he's kind of applying this principle of I'm going to use your behavior as the measure with which I'm going to measure to you my behavior. And then you're going to see that if you don't act shrewish, I don't have to act shrewish. If you act reasonable, then that's what I'll modify. I'm just a mirror. I'll reflect back to you whatever you reflect at me. So what kind of relationship do you want to have?
Hmm. I like that reading because I think within that, it makes some sense of like when he goes around telling her, well, that's not good enough for you. That's not good
Mm,
enough for you. And
yeah.
he kind of talks her up. I mean, you could read that as being flattery, as being something that's not good, but there's a sense in which I think he is trying to love her into being lovable, which
Yeah.
sometimes you have to do to people because we're not always naturally the most lovable things. I mean, there's always these
Hmm.
flaws that we have. And so he's in some way showing a mirror to her behavior, but also calling her to something better. Like, oh no,
Yeah.
I see that you actually are amazing and capable of all this great things, these great things. Um, and so yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
And this is he does that right from the very beginning of their meeting, right? Because in Act Two, scene it's still scene one. That's a long scene. When they first have that first famous verbal sparring match upon their first meeting, which is one of the greatest scenes. Um, he says, she says, they call me Kate, they do talk of me. And she says, you lie in faith, Catherine, for you were called plain Kate and bonny Kate, and sometimes Kate the Cursed. But Kate, the prettiest Kate in Christendom, Kate of Kate Hall, my super dainty Kate, for dainties are all Kates. And therefore, Kate, take this of me, Kate of my consolation, hearing thy mildness praised in every town, thy virtues spoke of, and thy beauty sounded, yet not so deeply as to thee belongs, myself am moved to woo thee for my wife. And she's like, you, what? Okay, this guy's insane. This guy's literally insane. No one has ever said that about me. Never, I've been called many things, but not mild or any of these sorts of things. But he sets the terms right away. This is how I think about you. And then you're right. I completely agree. He sets his shrewishness. I can't say that word. He sets his shrewishness in the context of, but I'm just trying to get the best for my Kate, right? I can't have you deal with something that is not up to your standard. Um, and so it is that, yeah, loving her into who she could be, which is what happens, I think, in the best of relationships, whether romantic or friend relationships, is a lot of times we hold our friends or our spouses to a high standard because we see what they could be. And we long for them to get there, not for us primarily, but for them. and it's more effective than trying to beat them into being what you want them to be or manipulate them into being what you want them to be or whatever.
There's also maybe something a little self-sacrificial about what he's doing here too, right? Because uh, as he acts out, a lot of the social stigma that would normally be directed at her is directed at him,
Yeah.
which then gives her the space to kind of rewrite a narrative about herself, right?
Hmm.
She's not the crazy one. He is. And she's the one who
Yeah.
comes along behind him to fix things up, to, repair stuff that gets
Yeah.
broken. She becomes a very different character because he's willing to take that on himself,
Hmm.
which, is I suppose you could say a real sign of true love that he's
Hmm.
willing to shoulder that for her in order to free her up from
Yeah.
from some of that stigma.
That's right. And especially if, if the problem is that she feels overlooked and unappreciated in her home, then he's going to the far extreme and not only doing all this stuff, as you've said, because he wants everything to be good enough for her, but also creating the conditions for everyone else in her household, his own servants, to appreciate her. Oh, thank God, here comes Kate. She'll sort this out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, it's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I have to say it's surprising to me because Petruchio doesn't from the way we first meet him and his whole taking on of this task, nothing about that gives the impression that he would be wise about it or have any subtlety to bring to the situation, right? I've come to get me a rich wife. It doesn't matter if she's rich, she's for me. Nothing
Right.
else matters. How she looks, how she acts, don't care about that. I just need the money, man. And you're like, "Oh, okay, not my favorite."
That is actually a dynamic I really wanted to explore because I think there's a sense in which a lot of the characters in the play are viewing marriage as a kind of contract, business
Hmm.
transaction, right?
Hmm.
Baptista certainly sees it that way.
Hmm.
He just wants to get these girls married. He's paying the dowry. It's all about kind of transactionalism. And it's interesting because that is Petruchio's initial motive, right? He comes
Hmm.
to wive it wealthily in Padua, he says.
Yeah.
Whereas, again, another contrast, because I think that's one of the geniuses of this play is the way that they're all always kind of mirrors and contrasts going on. When Lucentio arrives, he has an incredibly idealistic view of love and has Bianca kind of on this pedestal, But then to get her, he engages in deceit. He disguises himself as the tutor to get close to her. Um, And what happens is a total reversal. Because at
Yeah.
the end of the play, the marriage that was supposedly completely a mercenary arrangement between Petruchio and Kate ends up in a kind of unity, whereas the romantic marriage between Lucentio and Bianca ends in a kind of irony or a kind of almost discord, right?
Yeah.
The power dynamic is not it's creating some tension, I guess, between the two of them.
Hmm.
So I
Yeah, I
just
think that's exactly
I
right.
I find that
Yeah,
to be
and
a
so
fascinating way of
yeah, that's right.
framing
And,
it.
and it's like one of the things that he is again, everyone always wants Shakespeare and Chaucer and writers like this to be taking like a strong stand on things and they're writing to champion one or the other view and so the scholarship splits into these polarities about which view it is. And it's a strange thing. If everyone would slow down for a second and think about it, it's strange that it should be so easy to argue both sides of a dichotomy for the same author in the same text. That ought to give you pause about your confidence that he's doing one of these two things. And it's been my experience in reading these two authors, especially who I think are above all in English literature subjected to this treatment. It's been my experience that they're always doing something more subtle than the dichotomy suggests. And typically, what they're doing is, I think mimesis is always the key. They're gonna follow. Um, Absurdities they find in reality rather than reducing them to something that is clearly moralizable. And so I think in this scenario, we see an instance of Shakespeare taking these notions about love. Should love be a financial transaction or should it be the proto-romantic ideal, right? This is going back to the old high courtly romances and the way that all that sort of thing went down. Because that's where the battle began, right? And in the Middle Ages, marriages were among the nobility were transactional, and then courtly romance was invented as a way of responding to a feeling of unsatisfaction, unfulfillment in those types of marriages. And then those two systems have been at war ever since then and remain at war. Well, no, not really at war anymore because the romantic ideal has won out. But
Hmm.
in Shakespeare's time, they're still very much at war, and that's what's presented in this text. Rather than choosing and saying, look, it ought to be the one or the other, he simply says, some guys come at it from one perspective, some guys come at it from the other perspective, and guess what? You can't tell from the perspective they're coming from who's going to have the better marriage. Just because you have the higher ideal of love doesn't mean you're going to make a better match. And just because you are mercenary about love doesn't mean you aren't going to find yourself in possession of a top-notch wife.
Hmm. I think that's one reason. This is sort of a meta comment, I guess, but maybe that's one reason why it feels like our comedy today, at least in terms of like late night talk shows and things like that, maybe isn't as funny as it could be
Mm,
because it tends to be partisan, right? It tends
hmm
to be heavily reliant on one side of a dichotomy.
hmm
And in that it becomes unoriginal.
Yeah.
It becomes, really ideology, right?
Yeah.
Um, Whereas a real comedian, I think, is good at exploring the absurdities of a thing, especially like a cultural practice or something, right? In a way that perhaps makes us rethink that thing, but not according to a particular agenda
hmm
necessarily. At least not a regurgitation of one.
Yeah.
um Certainly everybody's rooted in their own kind of perspective, and that will come through, but it just, there's something very different about this where it's clear he's playing with something, and perhaps as a result we might think that the category of what it means to be a woman should be expanded a little bit, that maybe it was too narrow, in his day or something like that, but it's clear
hmm
that he's not really advocating an agenda or a
Yeah.
program in a way that, like, it feels like a lot of modern comedians tend to do.
Gosh, I think that's really insightful. I'm gonna say something that's really just restating what you said, but you made me think this, and I think it's really good. That the comedian acts as comedian when he points to the absurdity or the ludicrousness inherent in a situation. When he starts to talk about what it ought to be instead, he ceases to act as a comedian and starts to act more like a philosopher.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with a comedian being a philosopher, but if we put you on behind the desk because we want you to be funny, then well, let's be funny, right?
Yeah. I guess there's a sense in which some philosophers, I don't know, this maybe gets us aside, but some philosophers tend to operate best in their mode of description. I mean, we talked
hmm
about Marx's Communist Manifesto. I think
hmm
we both agreed that he's pretty good at describing the reality that exists. The question is, like, do we follow his prescription? So there
Definitely
does
not.
seem to be a diagnostic aspect
Yeah,
of philosophy that
there
the
is.
comedian is sort of engaging in.
That's
But
right.
yeah, but then how do you make your solution to that funny? It's
Yeah.
not.
Well, because what the comedian, Aristotle says that comedy is founded in recognition of incongruity. Right.
Right.
And so what the comedian is doing is he's looking, yeah, there's a diagnostic function, but he's delighting and highlighting especially the incongruity of it. It's so weird, right? I remember when I first learned what the word oxymoron meant. It was a comedian doing a stand-up routine talking about oxymorons in government. And he was like, peace initiative or peacekeeping missile and that sort of a thing. And then he sort of concluded like, President Bush. And it was funny. Yeah, it was a political statement, although it wasn't really because I think he would have said it about anybody who was in office at the time. It didn't feel strictly partisan, but he was setting up incongruity and pointing out the hilarity of the incongruity and then using that to claim that something else was incongruous that wouldn't seem incongruous up front. That to me feels like the particular genius of comedy, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not saying that comedians should only be comedians. No one should only be anything. That's boring. But I think that, we've all been watching a comedian, I think, who's doing a routine, it's going along great, and it's really funny, and all of a sudden it gets too real. Not even primarily because it's not that you think, oh, I really disagree with you, you bad person. Maybe you did, but it's more that you're like, oh, you stopped trying to be funny.
Mm.
Now you're preaching at me, or now you're trying to manipulate me or draw me to your point of view or something like that. And I think that you're right to bring all this up because in my view, that's the kind of thing Shakespeare and Chaucer don't fall into. They
Right.
do a great job of saying, no, we're going to stick with this is a comedy. I'm all about the incongruities and the absurdities. And so, what's my message? My message is people are funny,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, but what are you trying to say about love? It's funny.
And
If
that's
you want to,
why
if you want a deeper message, go to the tragedies.
And that's why there's a kind of timelessness to a work like this. If Shakespeare's purpose was to propose a kind of new model of womanhood or a new model of marriage, then yeah, maybe it would have been popular in his day. And then, in 100 years after it was written and a new model of womanhood or a new model of marriage was proposed, this wouldn't make any sense anymore. It would be
That's
something
right.
that would get discarded. It wouldn't be a classic. It wouldn't be enduring.
Yeah, it would only
But
be an
a good
oddity. It'd be
comedy is
interesting.
funny. But
Yeah,
Seinfeld, you go back
yeah,
and watch Seinfeld now,
yeah.
40 years later, and it's still funny. It's still really funny. But if you watch, an SNL season that's happening right now in 20 years, is it going to be? I don't think it's going to have the same kind of staying power. And I like SNL, by the way. I'm not trying to
Yeah.
make a political statement. I just recognize there's a lack of quality that you can find in other, comedians. And
And
so,
and like if you think about SNL, they're often funnier when the party they support is in power,
yes, Jon
right?
Stewart is that way as well,
Mm-hmm.
I think. Yep, yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah, yeah, because he's just been, I mean, angry and
Yeah.
lately, and it's more sad than funny a lot of the times. Viewers, I'd like to apologize on behalf of my colleague for pointing out to all of us that it's been 40 years since Seinfeld was on the air.
Is
That
that
is
actually
information
true?
we did
I
not need to
guess
have.
maybe it's more 30
It's
years.
got to be more like 30. Come on, man,
I
you're
think it was
killing
a
me.
90s thing, right? Yeah, 90, 89 to 98. So yeah.
All right, come on, man, be careful
But if
out
you
there.
round up,
Don't round up, because this is a trigger for people. Okay, we're getting old. No, that's right. And even, I mean, gosh, I remember growing up watching on Nick at Night, like the Dick Van Dyke Show, the Mary Tyler Moore Show, and these types of things. Those comedies were still funny, and Disney proved it. Like WandaVision was able to take on the comedy of a 50s and 60s and 70s sitcom all the way through to the present day by grabbing the things that were enduringly funny about those situational comedies. The situations of a sitcom are funny because of the incongruities of the things that are happening. Right.
yeah.
And I want to make another point about this. I did say if you want profundity, go to the tragedy. It's not what I mean. I think this actually is very profound as well. And I think
Yeah.
we've been demonstrating that in how we've been talking about it. That there are in fact, to hold the tensions together honestly, and without and unflinchingly is productive in and of itself of great profundity and insight. It's a matter of the emphasis. He's not writing this to be profound. He's writing it to entertain by enjoying dwelling on the incongruities. Nevertheless, the willingness to abide in the incongruity rather than trying to prematurely resolve it um, adds a depth and a subtlety and a complexity to his portrayal that makes it such that it's worth pausing over these things not only as funny but also as an instance of, wow, look at the fault lines in this society that he's portraying.
hmm hmm Yeah, he's certainly, well, he is kind of doing to his culture what it is that Petruchio does to Kate, right? In that
Yes.
he is offering a mirror and saying, "Hey, look, this is kind of the thing that we all do, and we don't even really think about it. This is just
Yeah,
kind of we expect this to be normal, and this is what everybody should do,
that's right.
And it's
And that's
it's
the
not.
truest meaning. That's the truest sense of mimesis.
Yes.
Not just to show what you see in the world, but to show what you see in the world as a mirror to the society. And that's why I said I was thinking about this from a medieval point of view, right? In the medieval world, it's all about mirrors. They're so important. You got to find the right mirror, look into it, and it clears everything up. It blows away appearance and allows the realities to show through. This is so fundamental to medieval thinking that one of the top journals, scholarly journals of medieval studies, is called Speculum, which is Latin for mirror.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. What else did you have that you wanted to talk about in this?
You've hit all my points.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I think that was most of my points as well. There's certainly a lot of questions I think that could be asked of the text, but I do feel like a lot of those questions are um kind of maybe more modern projections. Like, I don't know. As I was reading it, I was thinking about things like about the sort of nature of harmony and hierarchy
Mm,
But again, I think from a medieval and Renaissance perspective, those things are kind of taken for granted.
yeah,
Whereas in our society, we really wrestle with that idea of any sort of hierarchy.
yeah,
Um, even the same thing with like obedience and submission. I mean, these are important questions, certainly, but they are in many ways uniquely modern ones.
yeah.
And so, yeah, I think it's best to try to let Shakespeare. I mean, it's never possible for us to do this completely, but to try to
Mm,
let him kind of speak on his own terms.
hmm.
Because when you do find, I think that it's really genuinely funny.
Yeah.
It's not something that needs to be overthought,
Hmm.
uh, but that can be engaged with, I think, in a really fun way.
Yeah. And that may be the wisdom that it imparts, which is of a different sort than the wisdom that our age has on these types of things. Um, Even if we think we're right and they're wrong, their wisdom may still have something useful to offer us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good. Well, perhaps we could do our end note, which we're doing a joint one. We're signing
That's right.
together on this
That's
one. So,
right.
what is our
We are
end
we are
note today?
prepared to make, for the first time ever in classical mind history, an official endorsement
That's right.
of a product of human culture. And we are fully expecting the owners of the rights of this piece of culture to take note and to reward us accordingly, because we both independently decided that the end note for today would be the movie 10 Things I Hate About You. Why do
Yes.
you like it, Wesley?
Man, it's been a long time since I had seen it, but I think what I like about it, and maybe listeners can have picked up on this if you've listened to our past end notes. I like when works are contemporized in
Hmm.
good ways.
Yeah.
Um, I don't like contemporizing things just for the sake of it, but I
Hmm.
do like updating things and I do like kind of pushing them forward in conversations.
Yeah.
So like I kind of liked the newer Green Knight movie that was made.
Mm.
I don't know how you feel about this or not. We've never talked about it, but I like it because it was sort of wrestling with, I think, questions that we wrestle with today. And so if you're going
Hmm.
to rewrite a movie or if you're going to remake a movie or retell a story, it should be appropriate to the audience that would actually go see it.
Hmm.
We're not asking the same questions Shakespeare's asking, and so I think 10 Things I Hate About You does a great job of bridging that gap. It does a
Yeah.
good job of capturing the sort of essence of the story, but doing it in a more modern context that modern people would be able to understand. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I really appreciate about it. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, there was similar. There was a Romeo and Juliet movie made back in the 2000s, I think, maybe the 90s. And this might have been the one with Leonardo DiCaprio and
Mhm.
Claire Danes. I think it was. And it's modernized, right? And so you see when Lord Capulet says, give me my longsword. They reach up on the wall and there's a shotgun, and underneath the shotgun it says longsword, like that's the nickname for the weapon or the brand name or something like that. It's funny as a way to explain visually why he's getting a rifle when he's getting a shotgun when he asks for a sword. But it also underscores that the modernization is more or less arbitrary, and you're just picking up the story and dropping it in another culture, and there's no, or it's not organic.
Hmm.
What I liked about 10 Things I Hate About You is that it's not a modernization of the Taming of the Shrew in the sense of it is the Taming of the Shrew put in a modern setting. It's a transposition. It's looking at Taming of the Shrew and reading it for what's inherently important about this, and then doing a proposal and saying, now what if that story played out in American high school today instead of on the streets of Verona? And I think that's really worthy. That's worthwhile. I like that they gave it a different name, right? It's not Taming of the Shrew, but it's a supposal that is based upon Taming of the Shrew. And I think as far as the transposition goes, a transposition can be judged because you've got to make sure that the melody notes all have to have the same relationships to each other for it to count as a transposition of that melody. And as far as that goes, I think they did a really good job with it. And they've done a great job of making it fun for us to read this story today.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to describe it. Um, the form matches.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Because sometimes you get modern retellings of stories where they have to be cute with it and they got to totally change something, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking
Yeah.
about that carrying over the same, kind of rhythm, but yeah, in a new way.
Yeah.
Yes. Good. Excellent. Well, this has been fun. I really enjoyed revisiting this book, and listeners, we're so thankful that you have revisited it with us. Next up on our list, well, actually, first we should say that was the end of season 3. So we've been doing
Yay.
the classical mind for 3 whole seasons, which is hard to believe. And so that means we're starting season 4 here in October. We were got a little behind in our recording, but we're going to be recording Proslogion by Anselm next. It is not a long book. In fact, you can probably find a number of versions of it online for free. And it's not a very difficult read, or at least it's not a very long read. But I'm excited to talk about it. I think it'll definitely be a big shift after doing Taming of the Shrew, but it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, agreed. Good.
Excellent. Well, listeners, thank you for listening, and we will see you next time. In the meantime, keep reading.